would like to read a paper that I wrote. I'm doing this in a sort of podcast format, if you will. I may or may not add pictures, but I wrote this as sort of a short essay, or blog, if you will, that I probably would never post, so therefore I decided to read it. It's called The Truth That Never Was, so take from it what you will, and I hope you enjoy. I believe that we have evolved in order to recognize the beauty of the universe and manipulate free will through consciousness in order to become creators ourselves. The nature of existence lends no hint to the fundamental construct which underlies every plank length of existence. We can only speculate on what the strings or levers may lie below the machinery of what we call reality. Glimpses may be had of those depths, however fleeting, but this is not for us to comprehend. Even our shared reality is merely sensory and varies by each person's interpretation of the world. Each a different angle, every fear, every hope, every desire affecting how we perceive even the simplest of things. There is no consensus reality, and never was. We find strings and patterns which we agree on, and coalesce into factions and countries in order to uphold those patterns. Every creation eventually meets its demise, and human constructs are not excluded from that fate. This means one should not mourn the passing of truth as an objective term, nor the death of our faux culture. We need not fear that our economies are failing, that our people are divided, that there's war and pestilence and hatred and anger and frustration. For all these reflections of the angst of the universe, periodically we suffer, each of our own suffering a mirror of the planetary demise, sacred chaos, if you will, and from chaos emerges order. It's the only way it can be. Out of the ashes rises the phoenix. A rebirth always follows the death of a culture. In our case, the crumbling football stadiums will be no different from the gladiator halls of the past, and surely our descendants will see them as equally absurd. I can hear it now. What do you mean, Father? Our ancestors gave themselves brain damage for entertainment? Why? I do not know, son, I do not know. We've come a long way, haven't we? Perhaps in time, when the smoke is cleared and the damage assessed, we find the half-life of uranium was not so bad after all. Maybe. We could find ways to remedy our past errors, using mycelium and fungus to clean up the oil spills, maybe even nuclear waste. We might find a way to dispose of the need for harmful fertilizers and pesticides. We might even decide that eating meat, however delicious and nutritious it may or may not be, the argument of nutrition pales in comparison to the toll on our environment, and upon closer inspection, the miles of hog slop and manure holding ponds, the sludge from mining and extraction, and even the nuclear waste ponds left over from rare earth mining for the very magnets we use to make our wind farms from. We may decide that it was just better to start over. We had so many options. So much for green energy, but at least we tried. There's nothing depressing about a tree consuming the decaying corpses of 1,000,000 fallen cicadas. So brief were their lives, just long enough to add some spice to the soil and feed the local birds and lizards. But the tree sits silently, fungus assisting in careful dismantling of the innards and antennae of the rotting cicadas, till every molecule is dispersed throughout the underlying network of filaments and roots. Purpose served, the cycle starts over again. As in the Roman Empire, 100 others have fallen, some larger than others. We have reached a capacity beyond the resources which we currently possess. Farmland becomes wasteland. Desertification takes hold of our once fertile valleys and grasslands as we make way for more and more progress to ensure we have enough subdivisions to hold the workers for the factories that will collapse in a matter of decades. Yeah, we really fucked up. But what of it? What would we expect instead? We were primitive creatures just yesterday on the evolutionary tree, and we have to remember how much we are influenced by our primal brains. Working to better ourselves, while a noble gesture, cannot change society as a whole unless others are willing to participate. We only deserve better when we can agree on an outcome, and while the majority of us are still influenced by invisible forces and scary demons, that is what we will continue to pursue. Legislation will be passed affecting millions of individual people based on hearsay, religion, and philosophy. Nobody is ever happy with all the outcomes of a society. Part of what it means to live in a so-called democracy means we will not always agree on policy. That is as it should be. But when outside forces and lobbying interferes with rational discourse and decision-making, entire societies crumble under the weight of their own fat greed and ignorance. The people become the slaves and the masters become rich. We've been there for a long time. The hammer's been held up by a few people in powerful positions for some time now. When we meet the demise of our friends in Rome, however, it is not likely any superpower will arise from the ashes. It will be the people. This is because when the shit hits the fan this time, it might take a while to recover. Our society hangs by a thread, and the only thing keeping the world economies afloat is nothing has happened yet to shake us into the realization that we are completely going down the wrong path, and nobody is steering the ship. My belief, however absurd, is that everything has a purpose. In the case of consciousness, maybe nature wanted mankind to create something magnificent, something that would require a high degree of technology to achieve, such as sending our bacterial brethren out into the depths of space to colonize other galaxies. Perhaps. With our current knowledge base, we can do a lot of great things for ourselves, but what can we do for the universe? The idea seems so ridiculous on one hand, but replace the word universe with God, and everyone is suddenly on board. Can we not agree to disagree on how to define this force? What is the problem with having to define the one real God? At any rate, we as creators must find our own path and use caution not to fall into the trap of idolizing others. That is balanced with the need to avoid becoming an egotistical mess and needing constant approval of ourselves to keep going. One must be strong and wise and healthy and intelligent, and all of this in an environment where we are nurtured and feel safe, able to speak freely. How often do these conditions come together for the average person today? Not often enough. It's a cruel reality that many live in conditions far too disgusting to find the time to worry about setting any paths for themselves, except maybe to the water pump, where they pay for a gallon of fresh water from their own well, which is locked at night by a foreign company who bought the well and sells it back to the people. Yes, it happens, and it is reality. We treat each other like cattle, and this is always the sign of a failing machine. When all the parts are not given equal attention, one loose bolt can collapse the cart. We destroy our own system. This is just a fact. External circumstances, however, are more likely a culprit for the demise of the Western way of life, and may come sooner than later. No matter what mess we can create for ourselves, Mother Nature can deliver a lot more death than we can shake a stick at. The truth is, we've reached a time when our own nuclear arsenal could wipe out most of life on Earth in a giant flash in a nuclear winter. But a virus, too small to see, could do the same in a very short time. We are living beyond our means and refusing to look at things rationally. But other than preparing, we are screaming at one another. So goes life. You cannot prepare for a blind punch, only be ready for anything. My hope is that from those ashes, we can all be the phoenix. Are you depressed now? Don't be. The vast field of possibilities we have in each of us allows for a change of heart at any time, and a change of pace to suit ourselves. We really are creators of our own reality, for only our eyes see things the way we do. Nobody really has a consensus reality, except what we choose to pretend to understand in one another. Those patterns that we agree on, which create the divisions we decide to uphold as values. Those values differ as much as our faces do, though, as non-material ideas, they are harder to distinguish. I did not write this to show how we have failed, but to show why we will prevail. There was never any such thing as human spirit in the past, only human self-interest in not dying. We created that term to describe our desire to move forward, to discover new things and share those discoveries with one another. That meaning, however, has become rather obscured. Somehow, along the way, we decided that ideas were personal property and people were items of commerce. We stopped sharing our discoveries for fear of losing the ego boost that went with being recognized. And we thought the only way to protect our empires was to pretend the slaves had inferior genetics and deserved their fate. That was bullshit, and we always knew it. We wanted more than we deserved, more than was naturally viable long term, and instead of using nature as a guide, we took luxury as a given right. Was it? Who really benefits from the vast wealth which is accrued in the name of progress? We know where it goes, but forget that it is invisible. It has no substance. The trillions of dollars locked up in hyperspace will never be collected on, for the only thing they represent is commerce. And what can be obtained differs from that reality. $1 billion will not buy a carpenter if there are none to be found. So the system relies on participation by each one of us. It appears that people have discovered this and are refusing to play the game. This is a sure sign of collapse in an empire that has stood the test of time, the human empire. We have backed ourselves into a corner, and the only way out seems to be bringing the house down. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and maybe a few thousand nuclear missiles, or a virus, that kind of stuff. Which brings me full circle back to the loss of truth as an objective term. Do not mourn that which you have never lost, for you may never have had it in the first place. We never had it. Dusting off the cobwebs of our past and delving into the vast sum of knowledge we have accrued in the past few thousand years, those of us who study civilization will see that history is presented as merely a fantasy, a collection of anecdotes and stories left by the ancestors themselves, just as overstated and biased as any modern blogger, author, musician, or artist who has an opinion and a theory. Religion shows us this well, how a small idea can be magnified and expanded on for several hundred years, convince people who have no evidence whatsoever to believe as much, except what we call faith, from what others have told us. Faith indeed, for everything we are taught from the time we can talk is suspect, and the picture we have created of the world is far too subjective and personal to ever hope to study consciousness as an objective observer. What a joke of an idea. Oh, what a joke indeed. We are trapped by our own consciousness, yet freed from the constraints of clockwork by that very trap. Such a conundrum. The solution comes, eventually, to all who consider and seek it. The solution is to see there never was a problem, or always was a problem. The world will play out as it does, and the only control we have at all is over how we choose to observe and what we choose to do. Most importantly, how we react to those things around us. The solution to the truth dilemma is to realize that people have been lying to you from the time you were born. Presidents and officials have lied about the State of the Union from the time that any country was founded. Protecting self-interest has been a cornerstone of politics in every time throughout history. The founding fathers of the United States were not all upstanding men with fantastic ideas and honest intentions. They were just much better at hiding their corruption. In a time when the printing press was the best social media around, information has always been controlled, and when you consider why, you see there can be no other way. Nobody wants to be smeared. Nobody wants their darkest truths exposed or their failures displayed in the limelight. No politician wants their past inspected and every decision noted. But in the modern world, that's exactly how it is. Digital media has made it appear that there's something new in the works. They call it lying. Oh my goodness, what will we ever do? Sarcasm aside, those lies are easier to confront when the evidence can be presented, and our current world allows everybody to find whatever dirt they choose on whomever they may believe have committed a heinous act or used public funds improperly. We can find criminals and use digital trails to catch all kinds of failures of values and expose them instantly for the entire world to see. This means, on one hand, we can all help to expose the corruption, but on the other hand, it allows us to buy into the lies more easily, and the idea of fake news comes to be born. There's nothing new under the sun, and these behaviors are not exclusive to our generation of time. They're just more plentiful and easier to see. We have a literal window to the entire world. In many areas, more people have cell phones and internet than indoor plumbing. We are truly living in strange times, and our fast-paced lives create a sense that everything is falling apart and there's no way to stop it. It's not falling apart. Relax. It's just starting over. Reset, reboot, recharge. Of course, our descendants may or may not participate. I speak from my own perception, to be sure. I could be lying. You never know. Nothing I say should be considered fact. I know no facts, only ideas. I have no truths, only opinions. We can never perform the same experiment twice in the same way, as conditions and expectations are always changing, and the very observation affects the outcome of the experiment. We are ripples in a pond, moving outward, water slowly moving back to a calm state. We are like a stone, soon resting far below on the bottom of the ocean, with no trace left on the surface. Our societies are like anthills, working hard to build higher, higher, higher. But eventually, every one of them is abandoned and left to the elements. It is inevitable as the existence of matter from a vacuum. It just has to be. I see our trivial efforts to understand the needs of the universe as humorous. The way we argue about idols and gods or property and borders is akin to children fighting over an empty box. In the end, both walking away, and nobody had a point to begin with. Just a temporary release of emotion and a hope to have something others do not. Nobody really wanted the box. It was just too good to pass up. It was never about the box. Somebody else had it, so we wanted it too. Simple, really. To see and understand the vastness of the universe, to the best ability of a human, all senses and emotions considered, and not believe that the universe is conscious, well, that is something I cannot understand. The more we try to disprove a conscious universe, the more absurd the excuses become. On the flip side of that problem, the more we try to anthropomorphize God and put a face on that awareness, the more problems we run into when expressing ourselves to others. We may be fighting over something as trivial as a language barrier, which says a lot about our primal selves. Nobody really understands what we're here for, or what our deepest roots are, or what our destiny will be as a species, or a planet. Plenty of people pretend to know, and for every false idol, there will be 1,000 eager followers, so untrusting of their own minds merely because they have not yet learned to properly use them. They become trapped in a paradigm, indoctrinated in one way or another, and the groupthink is too strong to break free from. They become one of the millions of walking dead, zombies in their own minds, and trapped in the system of someone else's choosing. The cycle continues, and we end up with groups within groups within groups, just as it would be otherwise. It is, in a way, inevitable in a diverse world. It became about winning. It became about who can achieve the biggest, the best, and the finest. We tried on many different clothes to suit us as a people, and none of them could cover up our birthday suit to our satisfaction. We tried to tell God what to do. We tried to allow God to tell us what to do. We left one God for another God and another, and each generation found a new belief to suit what he thought to be reality, to explain the vast complexity of existence in a way everyone could understand. It never worked. We used archetypes and allegories, and the wise and educated of past generations encoded their discoveries into texts they hoped would survive. They discovered hidden languages in nature, the ones we call geometry, mathematics. We used those tools, and those predictions and equations allowed us to create amazing works. We could see results. They knew to preserve those truths which can be known, no matter how we differ in our perceptions. Mathematics resides outside our senses, outside our language. In using geometry, we can understand the space we inhabit. However, only slightly more than without it. No amount of research, no amount of scientific study, and no math equation, no matter how detailed and long, can explain the beauty of a sunset with the person you love, that last sliver of light, just as it passes beyond the horizon, like a glimmer of hope passing not away, but settling in for a brief interlude, soon to rise again. Hope is always there in the waiting, and the phoenix will rise from the ashes of what we call civilization, one way or another, because it has to. It just has to. We are significant through our very insignificance. This is the very free will that allows us to move through space and time with our own intention. What do we make of it? That's for us to decide. That's the end of my paper. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was about 6 pages long, so probably going to take a little space up there, but I'm thinking of doing more of these types of videos where I can read things that I've written, because I have a lot of writings and a lot of interest in, I'd love to be a freelance journalist or writer, for maybe somebody someday, but I prefer to do it myself, But I thank you for listening in, and if you have any comments, please leave them, and I'm always open to a discussion. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Over and out.